Hello folks, today we are going to go over making a small peony. Let's see. Hold on. Okay, let's start all over. Okay folks, today we're going to go over making a small peony, and this is the finished product. It has calyx on the bottom, and I'm just going to go over the size of cutters and things like that and building this little guy, okay? Okay, so first what I did is I started out with an 18 gauge wire, which is very, very sturdy, and let's see, about an inch size of a styrofoam ball. So 1 inch circumference. All right, and then what I did is I just inserted the wire inside and made a hole, and then inserted some hot glue inside the hole, and then I made sure that the wire is all the way through this bulb, because I found that if you just put it maybe halfway or a quarter, it's likely to come loose, and that you really don't want that to happen. So it's better just to have this wire all the way through your bulb. Okay, so now we have our cutters. These cutters are from actually 2 different sets. This is from the same set, and this is from a different set. So what I'm doing here is I'm just creating my own type of peony of how I want it to look. This is very similar to what I did to the large peony, where I just took a small cutter and just decided I wanted this cutter, and then just did one size up. So you can have like several different sets of cutters for a peony. Everybody has their own idea of what a peony is supposed to look like. So there's just tons of different sets. So what I did is I just made a mix and just decided this is what I wanted my peony to look like. If you look at nature and peonies, you'll find all different species of peonies, and they all look different. So this is what I'm doing here. As long as you have the smallest to the largest, you should be fine. And it's entirely up to you. If you're not sure, I would look at, I would just Google peonies and look at natural, what they look like in nature, and just go from there and experiment. Okay, so so moving on. So I have here my petals that I've already cut out, and I have them fairly thin. If you want, if you're going to roll them out, try to get them as thin as possible. If you have a pasta machine, I usually get it to a number 4, and I think that's perfect for me. So I have them under here, just a regular plastic bag, excuse me, and what I do to make it easier for me to thin out my edges and to soften my edges is I soften them, or I thin them out underneath inside the bag first. So basically what I'm doing is I'm just focusing on the very edge, I'm not really thinning it out anywhere else. I just want to focus on that edge. And that's also another reason why you want to make your petals pretty thin, is because it's easier on your ball tool, and it's also easier on your hand. If it's really thick, you're gonna have to press it down and then kind of like thin. If it's really thick and you're trying to thin it out on your pad, you're gonna find that you have to thin it out and it might tear. So I would say make it easy on yourself and just get it as thin as possible. And they also don't tend to dry out very fast when they're underneath and they're kind of sealed. So it's kind of almost like they're, you know, like a sticker. And they stay pretty moist under here. Okay, so also we'll be using drying cups. These are really great. At a certain point, I start putting the petals in here and they give it a nice curve. I set them for about 10 minutes, maybe anywhere from 10 to 15. And it just really helps it curve and keep its shape, which that's really what I'm looking for when it comes to making a peony. Okay. So let's get started. Excuse me. So we're going to start with the first 3. And this is the first cutter. We're going to be starting with 11 of this, of the smallest one. And what I like to use is my Viener. There's several different Vieners you can find for peony. A lot of them look like this, some look different. It just depends on what you like. You can also alternatively, I can't talk today, use the Dreschen tool, which is like a little foot. You can get a hold of these pretty easily. And if you didn't have a Viener, you could easily just take this little tool and just make little indentations. I find that the Viener really gives it a lifelike look, real, just very nice look of realism. So I'm going to put these in here. And I always kind of do maybe 2 or 3 at a time, just for time purposes. I'm not too worried where the texture comes because it's going to just be on the bulb anyway. Not really too concerned about that. Okay, so we have our first 3, and I'm going to really slather on the Crisco on this bulb, which I normally do anyway. Okay, so similar to doing the large peony, you're going to start with your first petal, and you just want to make sure that that petal is, the top of the petal is starting at the top of the bulb. You don't want this bulb to show at all. So I'm just going to start with that. And then I'm going to just wet the edge of this petal and cover a partial part of the first petal with the second petal. And I'm overlapping. And then I'm going to wet the second petal. And then what I want to do is I want to tuck the third petal in underneath the first. And then I'm going to wet the third a little bit. So I kind of have a little bit of a pinwheel type of motion going on where they're tucked underneath each other. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch the excess off. I'm going to take it farther down, all the way down to the bottom of this ball. And I'm going to pinch. And then I'm just going to get rid of this excess gum paste. Okay. And if you find like here, like it just wants to pop out or it wants to get loose, just wet it a little bit and glue it back into place. Okay, on for the next 3. Okay, so notice how I had pressed so hard that it kind of tore the petal. That's actually okay. It's kind of nice to have a little bit of imperfections because in nature there's a lot of imperfections when it comes to flowers, and it actually just adds to the realism of the peony. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet these petals from midway down. If I need to wet them any more once they're on the bulb, that's fine too. But I want to just do this to begin with. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to cover the seam. And what I want to do is I want to place the second set a little bit above the first set. So as you can see, it's a little bit above. Okay. And I'm going to basically do the same thing I did prior, where I'm just covering the seam. And then the final seam, and I'm just going to tuck this third one into the first petal. So if you find that you need to just do some extra wetting, just do what you need to do to keep it into place. Okay. So it's coming to a peak, which is fine. That's okay by me. So I'm going to just repeat the process of taking the excess, bringing it all the way down to your wire. And then getting rid of that excess. This is one thing about making flowers that you really need to keep in mind, is getting rid of the excess gum paste that can accumulate on the bottom where your wire starts. it can get in the way of adding a calyx if you just ignore it and you just let it accumulate. It can get in the way of adding or taping a leaf to the flower. So just keep in mind to really make sure that your bottom area is clean. Okay, so we're going to move on to 5 of these petals. And we're also going to start putting them in the cups at this point, because I really want to start to get them to curve inward. With the peony, you're going to go farther up and curving, and then as you get larger, it's going to start falling farther down as it's opening. So up and then farther down. So we'll go over that once I start adding the petals to the bulb. Got my petals here, and I'm just going to put them in the cups rather. And I'm just going to let these rest for about, I would say, 10 or 12 minutes. But while I'm actually doing that, I'm going to work on the next set and put those in cups as well. So now we're going to move on to the next set, which is the medium size, and I'm going to put 5 of these petals on the bulb. Okay, so I've been letting these dry for about 15 minutes or so. And then I also have the next size up, the first 5 of the next size up. So these have a nice curve to them. If you want them to be a little bit more curved, you can always take your ball tool and just kind of ball the bottom part of this petal, and that will kind of create a nice curve as well. Okay, so because I'm adding 5 petals, the petals will not completely cover each seam as the previous set. So I'm going to just stagger the petals a bit, and then they should fit nicely around this bulb. And I'm also going to place them a little bit above the previous set, just a tad bit above. And I'm going to tuck under each one. And as I'm tucking, I'm just leaving the previous petal a little bit open. And then I want to move the first one over a bit just to make room for the last one. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to unpeel it and just scooch it a little bit towards the second petal. Okay, and that way that there's enough even space for the last petal. So I've made sure that these petals all meet at the same height on top of the bulb. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to just fold them down a bit, and I don't really need to worry about the excess because it's going to smooth out pretty nicely on the bottom. I think what I'm going to do though is they're a little bit dry, so I'm just going to wet those a bit so they smooth out nicely at the base of the petal. Okay, so they're adhering very nice. Notice I'm just making sure that they're adhered at the base of the bulb. Not at the top. I don't want to ruin that texture on the top. That's exactly what I want, is a lot of texture. So I'm just going to keep it just like that. Okay, so before I add the next set, I'm going to soften the next 5, which is the middle cutter. So altogether you'll have 10 of this cutter here. So now we're going to place the next cutter up onto the bulb, and these have been in the cups for about 10-15 minutes, and they have a really nice curve to them, and that's what I'm really looking for. So then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place these at the same level as the previous petal, or I'm sorry, set, and I'm just going to cover that seam. So I'm just making sure it's glued down at the base, and I'm going to peel that and tuck the other one in. If you have trouble peeling it up and tucking it under, you can always do the alternative and just lay it on top of that petal. Okay, this is looking really nice. I like that it's really ruffled in the center, which that's one of the reasons why I picked out that cutter. So like I said earlier, you can decide on the cutters as to what look you want, or you can just keep to one set. It's entirely up to you. But I've got several cutters, so that's, or I'm sorry, several sets, so that's one of the reasons why I do that. Okay, so I just want to make sure it's really nice and stuck to the bottom, to the base. And as I'm waiting for the next set to dry a little bit, or set up in the cups, I'm going to start working on the final petals, which is the largest one. I'm going to add the final set of the medium cutter. Alright, so I'm just going to cover the seam, which I had done previously, but I want to place these petals just below the previous set. So if you can see, you've got the set previously right here, and then you've got this new petal here. And then alternatively, what I'll do is I'll just, instead of tucking it underneath, I can place it over and show you that it'll come out looking the same if you decide to do it differently. So I'm going to try to keep these consistent with the height. And if it's a little bit off, it really doesn't, it's not a terrible thing. Just try to keep it as consistent as possible. Here, there. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this final petal on top of the previous petal, but I want to tuck it underneath the first one. So I'm just going to peel him back and tuck him there, the last one, and then overlap it. And there you go. It's pretty much the same process. It's just done a little bit different. It gives it the same look as it would if you did it the other way. Okay, so as I'm waiting for the largest petals to set up, what I want to do is I just want to take my brushing tool and just kind of start opening these petals and get some space into them. Because right now the blossom's looking rather closed. So, and since these petals are pretty, I mean, they're still pretty soft, I can move them pretty easily. And the reason why they're opening and you've got space in between is because I'm just adhering at the bottom, and they're pretty much, they're not being glued so far up, and that's what's allowing them to open up. Okay, so now we're going to add the final 5 petals, and that is the largest of the group. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just cover the final 5, the seams, I'm sorry, the previous set. And then I'm just going to place this petal just farther down below the previous set. So as you can see, it's wanting, the very tip is wanting to hit the wire. So they're a little bit big for the blossom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the very edge off, and that actually helps a lot. I actually do that a lot, so there's not so much excess gum paste. You might have to do this, you might not. If it doesn't hit at your wire, then you don't have to worry about it, but at this point it's doing that, so I'm just going to cut the edges off. And I'm just going to place this a little bit below. And just tuck under. Now, what's going to happen as you get larger, as your petals get larger, is that it's going to want to flop open as you're putting them on. So what I do is I just hold the blossom upside down, and I basically just apply the flowers this way. It's a lot easier than having them flop all over, and then it gets rather frustrating. So it's just a lot easier to do. And as time goes by, when you get better at it, or you get used to making this flower, it just goes a lot easier. Okay, so then the last petal, okay, so here you have it. And you can really see what it looks like when it's opened. It's really beautiful. So what I'm going to do is, since these final petals are going to want to flop, and it's just because they're still wet, I'm going to hold this upside down. I'm just going to make a hook and just hang it on something where you know it's not going to get bumped or anything like that. And that way it's going to set upside down where the flowers are not going to flop, and then start setting if they're flopping over. And then, so I'll set that upside down for about 20 minutes or so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little cup. You can also use like a cupcake liner or something like that. But this is by Wilton, I believe. And I'm just going to insert the wire in the hole. And there you go. And I'm going to let it eventually just dry like this. So, and it'll be really nice. And then also, you know, as it's drying, you can just adjust the flowers or the petals as how you want them to look. If you want them kind of curled or a little bit torn or something like that, just to give it a little bit more realism, then you can do that. But for now, I'm going to hang it upside down because, as you can see, it's just wanting to flop over. So that's how you would kind of fix that problem. Okay, so next up we're going to be going over how to make a calyx for the peony. It's a little bit different looking than a rose, and also how to go over making specific leaves for the peony because they look a lot different than other flowers do, and also dusting the peony, what you would do to get a little bit of color and a little bit of liveliness. Okay, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Hi everyone, this is the continuation of the small peony and dusting your peony, as well as putting on your calyx, and then we're going to go on to making leaves for your peony, which is, it's up to you, it's optional, but I'm going to show you two different ways to do that if you don't have a cutter. Okay, so this is the peony that was made, and it's really nice and dry, and I'm going to use a kind of a hot pink color. And I'm going to mix it in with a little bit of a lighter pink. And that's going to tone that pink down. And then I'm going to start in the middle, just to kind of make the middle a little bit darker and to give it a little bit of a pop of color. Okay, and then from there what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring it out from the center, and I'm just going to focus on the edges. I can't really get farther inside there, and if I do, there might be a possibility of breaking something or chipping, and I don't really want that to happen. So, but what I'm doing is I'm just flicking my brush against the edge and just building that color. And you'll find that if you just keep at it, that color will end up on there pretty well. And here's the thing is, if you, instead of coloring the whole thing with petal dust, because you want a darker color, if you want a darker color of flower, then what you want to do is just make your base color of your gum paste darker. Because really the petal dust is just here to enhance the base color. It's not necessarily meant to color the whole entire flower. And it's also, if you were to color this whole entire thing with gum paste, it's very time consuming. And a lot of times you're going to find that you've got to do other things besides making a flower. So if you want, like I said, if you want something darker, then just darken your gum paste and just allow the petal dust to enhance that gum paste. Okay, so I think that looks really great. I might put just a little bit of a darker pink inside just to give it more depth. So I really like that a lot. So we're gonna go over adding the calyx to the peony, and basically the calyx is just two different shapes, a teardrop shape and then a small little leaf type of form. So basically what I'm doing is I'm just using a rose petal cutter, and this little shape, which actually is part of, I think it was like a lily cutter or something like that. So, but it works perfectly fine. after I put the calyx on the peony and dust it, I'm going to show you two different ways on how to make a peony leaf. So I have two examples here. I have one that has yet to be dusted, and then I have another one that I just dusted, and they're made in two different ways. So we're going to go over that shortly. So what you can do to add some texture is I'm just using a leaf former from the rose leaf or Viener. So I'm going to just place these on like so. And then with your dressing tool, what you can do is just kind of press the long little leaf parts into the rounder parts here, and just make some texture. And I'm just flaring it up a little bit just to kind of give it a little bit of life and character. So then to dust, I'm going to use two different color greens. I'm using a dark green, which is kind of like a hunter green. And then I'm going to use a lighter green, which is almost kind of like a lime green or a kiwi green. And then I'm going to add a little bit of red to the calyx, because just like the rose, the leaves have a little touch of red along with the green. So I feel like if I added a little too much here, what I'm going to do is just take some green, blend that red in. Okay, so I think that looks pretty nice. Okay, so there's two different ways to make a peony leaf. If you don't have a cutter, there's a really easy way of making a leaf for that. So this is the cutter, and this is the Viener that I used to make this leaf right here. So if you don't have a cutter or this Viener, you can always use something like this for a rose leaf. That'll work just fine. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your groove board and take some gum paste, roll it on one of the grooves, and I have it pretty thin. I can see actually the channel popping up, and that's how I know how thin my gum paste is. I'm going to peel that off. And this is my bottom. And then I'm just going to place my cutter in the center of this groove. Pop that out. And then I have here a 24-inch gauge wire. You can use 24, 26. I think you can probably even get away with a 22. And I just wet the end of it, and it has a little hook at the end. And I'm just going to insert that hook inside the channel, and I'm just pushing gently, just feeling that between my two fingers. And what I'm going to do is just pinch the end so I know that it's really adhered to that petal, or I'm sorry, that leaf. And then I'm just softening the edges. And then I'm just going to take this Viener and press against the gum paste. And then I get a nice texture. Now, you notice this is just one piece. This is called just a single-sided Viener. Okay, whereas this is a double-sided Viener. So if you ever see that, there is a double-sided Peony petal Viener out there, but you can also use, like I said, just a rose Viener as well. So, okay, so we have that. So now let's get to the other way of making the same kind of leaf. So I'm going to start out with, I would say, a ball the size of, I don't know, half an inch. Okay, and then I'm going to turn it into a teardrop. And I want a fairly long teardrop. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press this down. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little cut here. And then I'm just going to trim off the tip, because that might actually break. Okay. And I'm just going to narrow the base so it's not so bulky. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is wet my wire and then insert this into the base. And it's pretty thick, so you don't have to worry about it popping out. I know it doesn't have a channel, but I don't see it having any problem. It's going in there really nicely, and it's pretty sturdy. And then I'm just going to pinch just a tad bit. And if you're having problems getting it soft or thinned out with your ball tool, it probably just means that it's really thick, and what you can do is just kind of thin it out with your fingers, and that'll work too. Okay, so you have a nice little leaf without using a cutter. Alright, so I'm just going to do the same thing that I did previously. And ta-da! Look at that. So that saves you money on a cutter. So, and then I'm going to go over how to dust this leaf. It's pretty much the same colors as what I used on the calyx. So a little bit of that really pretty hunter green. And a little bit of the kiwi. Alright, then I'm going to do the back side. I'm not too worried about the back side because normally not too many people are going to see it. So mostly just the front. Okay, good enough. All right, and then a little bit of the red. Oops. And I'm just lightly brushing the red. My brush is not really heavy with the red color. Okay, there you have it. So we have this, which I previously did, and then we have the new one. And if you made enough of these, you add them to your peony, it would be just a beautiful addition to a beautiful flower. And it would just give it a lot more realism and just more texture. So, all right. So if you just imagine it with your peony, that would be I think it'd be really beautiful. So there you have it. Whoops. And you definitely want to make sure that you attach these leaves when they're dry. If you attach them when they are still wet, they're going to tear completely off the wire, so you don't want to do that. All right, so thank you for watching. Have fun, compare with real flowers, and experiment with colors and dusting. And thank you for watching.